Good evening. Hopefully my sound is working well and audio and video are all queued up. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us tonight. I would like to welcome you to the 7th event in a series of webinars on cannabis business operations procedures provided by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation. My name is Frank Louie and I am the Chief Operating Officer for the California Asian Pacific Chamber of Commerce, and I will be your moderator for this evening. The webinar, amongst other educational sessions, is the official launch of the Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance Program for social equity applicants in the great city of Los Angeles. The goal of this program is to help applicants obtain a commercial cannabis license, as well as operate a successful cannabis business. Now, before we get started, let's take a few moments to review some of the housekeeping rules for tonight's event. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process on DCR's website. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio function will not be available to you during this session. However, you will be able to see and hear all of the panelists. There is an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comments on the information. Please use caution when sharing personal information in the public forum and keep your questions focused on tonight's topic. Please ask questions and interact with the moderator and the panelists about tonight's subject matter in the Q&A box. We are gathering and responding to your questions throughout the presentation. We'll have a robust Q&A session where you will get responses in the last 30 to 35 minutes of tonight's event. To ask a question, we're encouraging you to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. We encourage you to ask questions so that in that Q&A box so that everyone will be able to see the questions and the answers when they're responded to. We also want to ensure that the education you're receiving in these webinars is beneficial and useful to your cannabis licensing process. Therefore, we'll be posting a survey link in the Zoom chat later in the presentation and encourage you to participate in filling those out. We will use this feedback from these surveys to inform how we structure these events moving forward. And a final note, the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation does not endorse specific companies or products. The content presented here is for informational purposes only. Now let's transition to our topic of the day. I am pleased to introduce this evening's subject matter expert, Jesse Parente. As a director of programs for PCF Insurance Services, Jesse offers over 15 years of commercial line risk management with a specialty in protecting the transportation and food delivery industry, in addition to over 5 years in the cannabis industry. PCF is licensed in all 50 states, managing 2,000 plus restaurant locations and over 400 cannabis businesses. Jesse's key client base includes last mile delivery for pizza and food delivery, cannabis cultivators, extractors, manufacturers, delivery, transportation, and distribution organizations. As a risk advisor, he helps create custom solutions using safety, consulting, HR, and insurance placement. Jesse is a proud associate member of multiple business organizations and advocacy groups to build and nurture key relationships. These include NCIA's Risk Management Insurance Committee, CCI's Retail Delivery Distribution Risk Management Insurance Committee, California Cannabis Couriers Association, Cannabis Distribution Association, Sonoma County Growers Association, Coachella Valley Cannabis Alliance, Women Grow, the Cannabis Alliance, and the Cal Asian Chamber Foundation. Jesse is a busy man, to say the least. We are lucky to have him tonight. Welcome, Jesse. I'm now pleased to pass the virtual mic to you. Please feel free to begin sharing your screen and kickstarting the presentation. Thank you, Jesse. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for your time. I'm very excited to be here and very excited to be supporting the social equity movement we're doing in LA, and I really am hoping that this information we discuss this evening will be beneficial. My intent is not to fire hose everyone, because insurance is probably one of the worst topics for anyone to hear about, but my intent is to give you good value information and furthermore help you understand that the task ahead of you of what you need to do can and is easily to implement if you have a plan and you're not going to be overwhelmed. So from there, let's start into the presentation. Tonight, what we're going to be discussing is insurance and risk management, and then we're going to go into all aspects of what that entails. So one of the things we'll discuss is cannabis liability, what that entails and what the exposures are. Next, we'll be talking about crop insurance and what that actually means, the difference between indoor and outdoor crop. Also, we'll be talking what's called stop throughput, or now considered cargo transit, or another term called inland marine. This also affects your property and your product while in process. Next, we'll be talking about the different forms of commercial auto. Then from there, we're going to be talking a little bit about workers' compensation and the importance of workman's compensation. The key thing to be aware of when we discuss workman's comp is in the state of California, we are not allowed to have independent contractors. They all have to be W-2 employees. So we'll discuss that a little bit further in the presentation. Lastly, part of your workman's compensation, they have what's called an X-mod. We will elaborate on what this means and the benefits of actually doing a good job with your X-mod versus your X-mod working against you. Now let's dive into all the different classifications of the industry. We've got cultivators and nurseries that could be indoor or outdoor or greenhouses. We have processors and harvesters. The processing also falls into our trimmers. That falls into people doing pre-rolls, packaging. Then that falls further into manufacturing. Manufacturing deals with non-volatile and volatile. When I say non-volatile, we're talking about live rosin and going from like cold water hash and doing presses. The other form, which is volatile, is going to be true extraction, whether you're using butane, hexane, propane. CO2 is non-volatile based on your classification, and we have to go back to LA and verify on that. Next, we have our distributors, which are basically transporting your product. They're going to be full distribution, or this can also fall to transportation, and you're actually transporting your own goods. Another category is the actual building owners. The building owners are actually sometimes a licensed operator, sometimes it's your landlord. So the understanding of that the insurance that is needed for the landlord has to be cannabis specific, not just standard insurance. And that's a conversation that we have with many business owners when they bring in cannabis tenants and they're unaware of that their current insurance does not provide coverage and they need to have the solution provided. Next, we look onto transporters, and this is actually going to be more non-storefront delivery. So B2C delivery versus B2B, which is what your distribution and wholesalers are. Then we have our brick and mortar retail. This example here also can bootstrap delivery onto it as well if you want with a model. Next, you have your testing labs. The one interesting thing about this slide is that you can be vertically integrated and be able to do everything. You are not able to be a testing lab and be involved with anything else. It's a conflict of interest. So depending on how you are doing, some people are getting into testing. That's all you'll be able to do. If you do not do testing, you're able to tap into all these other areas within the industry. Now let's dive a little bit farther into the coverages and classifications of what we deal with. So the basic insurance liability limits start off with what we're looking at right now. General liability is the requirement by the city of LA and the state of California. Excess liability is not a requirement, but a highly recommended based on your company. And product liability is also not required, but highly recommended. We'll go a little bit more in depth under these coverages later on the slide, but ultimately, just because it's not required does not mean that you should not have it as a business owner. Regulation and what a good business does are not the same thing, and we'll discuss that a little bit further. A little bit diving into is property coverage. Property has multiple different forms. It literally could be your property, it could be your building, it could be your inventory, it could be your crop, which is where property falls under crop coverage. And when we talk about crop on the property aspect, we're talking about indoor crop. So indoor is going to be for all of our indoor grows or greenhouses that are full solid structure. If you are an outdoor grow, a hoop house, this is not able to be covered currently in the current marketplace. So be aware of, you're looking for crop, it is considered property, and it is only covered under property if it's an indoor secured structure. Equipment breakdown is a catch-all. It actually is a blanket that supports crop, property, loss of income, and other various coverages within your policy. And we'll discuss that a little bit further in the presentation. Now let's talk a little bit about liability exposures. General liability is the insurance that protects your business from another person or business that claims any type of bodily injury associated with medical costs or damages to the property. We're going to talk about some examples on what would be covered. If a client is at your place and trips over a bag, you're legally liable for this injury. The injury would be covered under your liability and would actually protect you. One of the things that people are not aware of is when you bring a vendor onto your site, the second they walk into your door, you're liable for anything that happens. Trip and falls happen more often than you're aware of, and it's something to be aware of. And we'll discuss this a little bit more when it comes to safety and protecting your business. Another example is, hey, you're at someone's office, you spill a cup of coffee on their server, and then they lose all the data that's on there. The insurance will actually cover the subsequent claim, and it'll protect up to the policy limits. Personal injury, this is one of the big ones. You have two people having a conversation. One person makes some false, unflattering comments about someone. Another person interprets it as direct effect and sues you for slander. Your general liability will protect you and create defense on your behalf and pay for the attorneys to do this for you. The reason these are all important is if you do not have these insurances, the only way you can protect yourself is to hire an attorney. And that is the reason you do a risk transfer of buying insurance versus dealing with things reactionary. Product liability, it is your biggest exposure. Everyone always says, no one ever died from cannabis. That is very, very true. Problem is it doesn't keep them from not suing you. I've actually been involved with the only vape claim that has existed in the United States. And it took 18 months for us in defense to get determined that we were not liable. Everyone was brought into the claim, but because of our insurance policy, the defense was on our behalf. My client bought a policy for $4,000. The defense costs would have been $50,000 just on defending, and even though he was not at fault. So this is really a big deal when it comes to evaluating your insurance, why you should buy it, and ultimately you're buying a contract to do a risk transfer. The purpose of it is to actually provide strict liability and the defense on your behalf. That is really the intent of the product liability. We really want to be able to have defense on your behalf by the insurance carrier versus you having to find defense on your behalf at an hourly cost. The limits of buying coverage vary from here. Minimum limits are 1 million, 1 million. From there, you can buy 1 million, 2 million, 2 million, 2 million, 3 million CSL or combined single limit, and then lastly, 5 million combined single limit. You are able to buy excess product liability as well. Limits of those are usually getting to about 5 million combined single limit, and you can stack up to 10 million combined single limit total. So let's go a little bit more into product liability. It's going to cover you from damages done from any faulty or defective product that you are responsible for. And we're going to go a little bit into a depth of what exactly that means, because from there, this is a lot more broad than people are aware of. Anyone in the supply chain of the defective product can and will be taken to court. Let's talk about some bodily examples of what physical injuries and things have actually happened. First thing off, over intoxication. Someone for the first time has an edible. They are not aware of what to expect. They are now much more intoxicated than they intended to be, and If they get behind the wheel, go somewhere, hurt someone, now you've created a massive situation. Not only does intoxication become a product liability claim, it could become a general liability claim based on the dosage and what has been done. You do not want to be in a situation where a rookie has actually consumed something and you are to blame because your brand is what they consumed, or even worse, they consumed it from the retailer delivery company and then they're named as well. We're going to discuss how everyone is named when claims come about. Long-term medical effects, including addiction. This is a new gray area that's coming about that we want people to be aware of. Addiction is something that we're dealing with on multiple aspects when it comes from taking people from opioids and transforming them over to CBD or CBG or CBN or THC. This is a gray area when it comes to this because lawyers are looking for areas for vulnerability. Manufacturing exposures. This could be, hey, wrong dosage, wrong labeling. There could be wrong in packaging. So there's lots of areas where this can come into play. Contaminated products, like we were talking about, testing was done or falsified testing was done to either change the way the records were done, the potency on a package, or actually that it should have failed and should never have gone out to market. These are a couple of examples of things that have actually are a problem and are creating product liability claims. Design defect and product recalls, advertising misrepresentations, inadequate safety warnings like Prop 65, and improperly inadequate labeling, child protective area packages, or making falsified claims on your packages. Example I gave earlier, a consumer gets sick from an edible, a product liability claim is going to come about from this because they have nowhere to do is blame. And then from there, this is where the whole process goes. Starts off with me consuming it from a specific brand. Who is going to get sued? Everybody. This literally goes back down to where did the product get sourced from the cultivator? Then it goes to how was the product processed and then packaged by the distribution company and or manufacturing company. Then it's transported from the distribution company to a retailer, whether you're a brick and mortar or a non-storefront delivery, and then it is sold to a consumer. Everyone in the vertical chain is going to be named in the suit and in the process of have to step up and provide defense. Your product liability policy will step up and provide defense. If you do not have a product liability policy, you'll be hiring an attorney. Unfortunately, an attorney for product liability claims and defense are about $400 to $600 an hour based on what you're dealing with. So when you think about that, minimum premium policy, $2,500 a year annually. For 10 hours of an attorney, you're spending $4,000 right off the gate. And that's what it's going to cost to have a letter written for you and for them to just step up in defense before they even do anything for you. So it's a cost analysis, understanding risk transfer for pennies on the dollar to buy peace of mind and also be able to be an effective business. Now we're going to dive into property. Property is kind of a broad topic, and we'll kind of go into the different categories of what it does and actually what it covers. So starting off, business personal property and tenant improvements. These are two areas that directly affect your building if you have a physical location. The tenant betterments are actually your build out. So you have the building itself, whether it's owned by the landlord or owned by you. If you're doing improvements and you're the tenant, these are permanent fixtures, your countertops, your walls for your grows, your safe, your vault rooms. That's all your tenant betterments. Your business personal property are your cash registers, your computers, your desks, all the things that are not permanently attached. The best example I give when it comes to comparing these two things is you take your structure, flip it upside down, everything that is actually hits the floor, that's your business property or BPP. And everything that's permanently attached is your tenant improvements. These two areas do need to be specified and separated when it comes to coverages, because if you have a loss, there are individual silos on actually how claims are paid out. Your grow, extraction, and baking equipment all fall under business property, but they do have subcategories. So depending on where you are and what you're doing, for example, if you're an extractor, your manufacturing equipment is going to be anywhere from $500,000 to a couple $1 million. there actually is coverage specifically for manufacturing equipment that's separate from your business property. Loss of income is also very important. You want to be aware of protecting your income. If you understand your revenue is going to be X, and if you have a loss and you were closed for 90 days, 180 days, 360 days, how long is it going to take for you to get back open, and how much revenue are you losing? So ultimately, you want to be insuring and protecting your income. Recommended, you do not want to be insuring to 100% of your revenues. We do recommend that you do what's called a business income worksheet to evaluate what this is. In year one, these numbers are very hard to determine, and we recommend as a starting point, looking at your numbers being and protecting your income somewhere between 40 and 60% of that dollar range. So for every dollar of income, you want to insure 40 to 60 cents on the dollar. After year one, you can do an evaluation, do a business income worksheet, and determine what those finite numbers are. And furthermore, be able to clearly identify how much money you need on a monthly and annual basis to be protected, to make sure that if you have a total loss, that you are up and running and your business is not directly affected. Next, we're talking about crop and finished stock. So once I said earlier, crop is indoors, not outdoor. It is considered glorified property. And our recommendation is you literally can be insuring seeds and babies. There's no need to be doing that. Ultimately, our recommendation is you want to be insuring your flowering plant, your harvested material while it's drying, and then your finished stock, which is actually all your bucked product that's ready to go and be sold to distribution. The reason for this is that ultimately your babies have a much less value. And the further you get to the finished chain, it has the biggest value for you, and it also has the largest crime element. When you're in these areas, when it comes to harvesting material and finished stock, you need to make sure that you have secured storage and also vaults / safe storage that have been approved not only by the city and the state, but also by your insurance carrier to guarantee that they're going to pay a claim if you have a loss. Lastly, equipment breakdown. Equipment breakdown is essential for any business that has any operating machinery. That is retailers that have that basically have any type of generators or HVAC or AC equipment on top of their roofs. Any type of grow operation that basically same type of thing has chillers and has compressors. Then you look at all your extraction companies, they also have this type of equipment. Equipment breakdown is not only going to protect the equipment, it covers your loss of income and is a blanket of all these coverages. The reason it is important is that equipment breakdown is one of the largest triggers for insurance coverage. If you do not have this coverage and you have something happen, it will not pay claims, specifically loss of income due to an equipment failure. So make sure that you are aware of this when reviewing your commercial policies. Sorry, everyone. All right, so when basically product starts leaving your premises, it's about controls and what you do and don't do. Once product is leaving your facility, you need to be making no stops, and everything is going to be basically in a lockbox and controlled at all times. We talked a little bit about crop insurance, but ultimately, like we were saying earlier, is it's a physical loss of covered property. And whether it could be heat, I can give a great example. I have a client that had an indoor grow. Their HVAC went out for 24 hours. The temperature, because it was based up in Northern California, the room got over 110 degrees for 24 hours. The next day, the entire room was lost. And the product that was in the drying room right next to it also got lost. A harvest total was about $145,000 in total loss because we had flowering coverage, harvesting coverage, and finished stock coverage. We had the total loss covered, and it was all because of equipment breakdown. If we did not have equipment breakdown coverage on the policy, no matter what happened, we had zero coverage. That's really why I want to impress on this, because crop is something that's really important for all of our cultivators and anyone that's actually dealing with product. Stock throughput. It is an all risk coverage. We're going to talk a little bit about this, and this coverage actually has changed a little bit in the last few months, where it has in some ways not broadened, but actually shrunken due to the exposure. So when I talk about stock throughput, it's basically property coverage that covers from the entire process that we deal with, from the raw stock of the plant to it being processed, to it becoming a finished product, to being finished stock, then becoming an inventory, and then actually being stored somewhere and processed until it actually is in transit to the actual retail operation. The purpose of this is it covers it from A, B, C to Z. It also is something that we want to make sure you have, specifically distribution companies. This is a really big deal. Stock throughput has become a lot harder to get. It has now transitioned to what's considered cargo transit or inland marine, which ultimately provides the same coverages. The only difference is that it's basically only when it's in transit. Two areas and two type of operations that this is really important for is obviously manufacturing companies, because they have a lot of product within, whether it be raw material that they're basically they're changing it and making it either a crude material, distillate, or something else. And then a distribution company who has warehouses of millions of dollars of product sitting under their care, custody, and control, and that if they have a fire, theft, or anything, this is a part of what's going to cover for them. The key thing also about this is that it combines storing, processing, packaging, transporting, and inventory coverage throughout everything. We really want to make sure it's covered seamlessly. It's from seed to sale. The key thing is also it's combined coverage. They're not going to be able to deny coverage, but in the same breath, the all risk coverage we're talking about is extremely difficult to get. It has a lot of detailed underwriting, and that's really why the cargo transit policies come into play, because the intent is to protect this product in other insurance policies and only be covering it when it's in transit. The key thing also when you're looking for coverage for this is that you want to be getting a selling price versus actually your wholesale price. The intent is to indemnify you and get you whole in any way if you have a loss, and that's the purpose of this. Selling price valuation, that is the number one key to what you're doing. You want to make sure that these policies are going to give you what the value you need and that you won't get shortchanged in anything in case you have a loss. All right, now we're going to dive into one of my funnest areas, commercial auto insurance. With commercial auto insurance, there are two specific areas about it. One of it is called owned auto. The other one is called non-owned auto. We're going to kind of dive into depth on what these mean and ultimately describe and explain in depth what the differences are. Commercial auto is going to be owned by the business owner. And from the business owner, the policy has very specific things that it needs. It has also very specific components of what it provides. The key thing about the owned auto policy is it a scheduled driver policy. For every driver that is going to be driving the owned auto of the business owner, they have to be scheduled on there. They are not allowed to just drive the vehicle without the insurance carrier being aware of this. From that, we're going to talk about the differences of kind of the owned and the non-owned auto. The key thing about the owned auto is that it actually offers collision and comprehensive coverage. Collision is obviously any type of liability that happens from yourself or someone else, and you have actually physical damage to the car. Comprehensive is basically the same type of exposure, but the car is not moving. Next, the other thing with part of physical damage is it takes care of the cost of the repair of the vehicle, and it also will take care of the damage of another vehicle if someone else is damaged as well. The other thing as well is the liability that it picks up. It'll cover bodily injury and property damage to the third party if the client is at fault. So give an example of that is delivery driver makes a right turn, hits another car, our driver is directly at fault. They have physical damage on their own personal car and the car of the other person. The other person is actually injured. The liability will take care of the medical and everything needed by the other party. They will take care of the physical damage of the other party. They will take care of the physical damage of your physical car. And then lastly, your policy and your workman's comp policy will take care of your employee if they are hurt. The key thing on this is also liability is there's what's called uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage. You do not want to ever skimp on this coverage. This actually provides a blanket of coverage for you, for the drivers that are involved with an accident that do not work for you. I'll give an example. In LA, plus 40% of drivers either do not have insurance or are underinsured driving around with state minimum limits, which is 15, 30, 10. If your driver is hit by one of these drivers and they are significantly hurt, your uninsured motorist is over and above your workman's comp. Your workman's comp will take care of the medical payments and take care of your well-being for your employee. But if there's liability over and above this, the uninsured motorist or underinsured motorist coverage will be kicking in as additional coverage. Other parts of the owned auto coverage include medical payments on behalf of the employee, towing and labor, auto loan, and lease gap coverage, including rental reimbursement. Most of these coverage everyone's probably heard of before on their personal auto policies, but the coverages are much more extent when it comes to commercial auto. Policies we are writing are 1 million combined single limit versus personal auto policies do not exceed a limit of any more than 500,000 combined single limit. Non-owned auto. This is the biggest confusion, I think, for most people with the space we're dealing with and what can and cannot be done. First off, there's multiple ways of how non-owned auto is perceived. When your company owns the vehicle, it's one thing. The non-owned auto is when we are using an unowned car, whether it be from an employee, a principal, or a partner of the organization driving their own personal auto. This basically includes employees driving their vehicle, and this is the B2C delivery that I know a lot of operators do. Employees driving their own vehicle on behalf of a cannabis delivery company, and this policy actually provides liability over and above the personal auto of your employees. The one thing to be very aware of, and I had this conversation with many people, is you need to be aware of that everyone's personal auto insurance has an exclusion for business use or any type of delivery, whether it be food, and especially cannabis. There is a workaround, and we'll discuss this a little bit further. The important part of this is your employee's insurance does not provide any protection for you, them, or your business if they're driving on your behalf. Here are some examples of how non-owned auto actually works. Vehicles owned by a partner or a partner of the partnership, and he or she uses their personal vehicle for company use. Good example, outside sales, or you have someone running errands, you go to the bank, they're using it for a business purpose on business time, but they're in their own personal car. Next, you have the company president borrow a vehicle from a fellow farm, and then he uses it at his farm. Now you got a non-owned auto exposure. So once again, you got to be aware of this coverage is very important for every business, whether it's incidental or it's actually direct business to consumer use. Lastly, this is basically what we're talking about. The employee's vehicle is being used on behalf of the company. The purpose of this is you need to have the conversations of the importance of your employee, what their responsibilities are for their insurance, and what your insurance is to protect them as well. B2C delivery, which is what we're going to talk about next. If you are doing the non-owned auto, by law, you have to do what's called mileage reimbursement. It is based on every mile. I believe this number actually has decreased since this slide was made. So I believe it might be 56 cents versus 57.5, but please verify that with the state of California. How this works is the federal government has a recommendation that is required. In the state of California, it is a requirement of what needs to be done. This number has gone up and down in the last 10 years. So we want you to verify for yourself if this number actually has decreased, because I did a report today and it was 56 cents. The purpose of this is every time you send an employee into their car to do a delivery of cannabis on your behalf, you've got to pay them 57.5 cents per mile. If you have an employee driving 50 miles in one direction to do deliveries, that's 100 miles radius, you'll be paying them $57.50 a day to do deliveries. Non-owned auto does not make sense if you are doing long haul delivery. The only time it makes sense is very similar to the food delivery model. Anywhere from a 1 to 5 mile radius is what is cost effective and productive for your organization and profitable. When you start actually exceeding this mileage, you create a problem on profitability and how far out your employees are going for what they're doing. We recommend non-owned auto for local delivery and owned auto for long haul delivery. And when I say long haul, we have people that are going 150 miles out to the desert, up to San Bernardino Hills, out to the valley, out to San Diego. We want to make sure that if they're doing these larger routes, that they're doing it in an owned auto versus a non-owned auto. The reason this actually is a big deal is people will look at non-owned auto first because it's cost effective. The entry-level non-owned auto price is about $5,000 a year. That will allow you to get 5 vehicles on the year to start. If you look at an owned auto, new vehicle with full coverage is going to be almost $5,000 a year as well for one vehicle. So this is a lot of what we discuss with people on strategy and what their intent for their business model is. Are you going to be local delivery and expand to longer delivery, or hybrid of both out the gate? Most businesses do both. We recommend both, and you need to decide what makes the most sense for your business. Like we just said, know your model and plan accordingly so that financially, this can actually be something that works in your favor and doesn't hurt your bottom line based on the model you started and where you are later on. Let's talk about the coverages for cannabis delivery ops. Delivery is a huge cash driver, but I also, like we said, if you don't run it right, it can actually be a detriment. So the non-owned auto will have mileage costs, and if you do not do it correctly, it'll have a negative effect on your bottom line, and ultimately you're going to try to figure out what's going on. You really want to be working with a risk manager that understands the auto space, can actually talk through scenarios with you and help financially have you understand, hey, if I want to do this, what does it mean? If I want to do this, what does it mean? And that's really the key, because ultimately, if you don't do this correctly, you're losing money. And it's going to be a huge negative on your bottom line, a big negative on your morale. And as you try to grow and thrive in this environment you're developing, you're going to create more challenges than you're intending. Now let's talk about distribution companies. Distro is not allowed to have non-owned auto. They are only allowed to have owned auto. The reason for this is due to the security measures for the vehicles themselves. You're required to have cages, safes or lock boxes, cameras, security, alarms, and in some cases, reinforcement on the vehicle itself. We work with many, many operators, very large fleets that handle everything in California and other states because we work nationally. This is a really big deal when it comes to what you're doing, because these vehicles are not cheap. And ultimately, you're going to be investing anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 in controls and safety on top of buying the vehicle. So make sure that when you're doing this, you've done your pricing. And a lot of people I'm talking to now are looking at lease to buy options so that they can actually front load pricing, work with your dealership on what that means with the intent to buy, so that you're not penalized due to the mileage that you put on the vehicle over the first 3 to 5 years of your lease. Economic thing just to discuss and think about for your model. Like we said earlier, regulation is designed for public protection, but it is not designed to protect your company. When it comes to what's required, you are required to have general liability, and that is it. You are required to have workers' comp if you have employees, and you are required to have commercial auto if you have any type of delivery or distribution exposure. The challenge with this is this statement is pretty vague, and we have seen a lot of people that don't understand that you can't go to State Farm and Farmers and say, hey, I need a commercial auto, and expect the car actually to be covered correctly. I review a lot of things that are done incorrectly by the industry unintentionally. People are unaware that they don't have coverage. And when they go to buy it, they're actually blown away that what they bought didn't do anything for them. And the reason why is that cannabis is still not approved under the federal government. And because of it, the standard insurance industry is stepped out of it. And we literally have a very limited amount of carriers that will actually protect us correctly. just be, like I said, as of today, regulation doesn't enforce insurance, but it is something you need to be aware of, because one of the challenges we have with delivery operations is that they aren't given the guidance on what needs to be done correctly. So once again, you need to be working with someone, either a consultant on your safety and working with a broker that truly understands the exposure of cannabis auto, and furthermore, understand what the costs are, what you need for protection, and furthermore, what you need to do and not do in this situation. Regulation will not pay for your claim, specifically if someone gets disabled or kills another person. Once again, why you need to be buying insurance. If someone is not telling you to do it, just because it's not being required does not mean that you should not be actually becoming a good business owner and doing best practices. If you have auto exposure, buy auto insurance. If you have employees, buy workers' comp. You need to be getting general liability at minimum, and we highly recommend product liability. Even as a retail operation, you will be named in a claim if there is one. I have 3 product liability claims that I've had 3 of my retail operations get involved with in the past 6 years. All 3 of them did not have product liability. All of them had to pay defense. My smallest payout was $25,000. The largest one was $100,000. Kind of going back over some general topics. General liability, recommended limits, 1 million, 2 million. This is standard liability limits. Product liability, recommended but not required. Once again, these are limits we also recommend of the 1 million, 2 million, just like general liability. General liability and product liability are not the same policy like they are every other industry. So unfortunately, you do have to write a product liability policy and a general liability policy separate. These policies are based on your revenues. My recommendation for year 1, no matter what your performance is, no matter what your projections are, be extremely conservative. If you think you're going to do $1 million in year 1, please project somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 so you do not overly pay for your insurance, and you do not give the insurance carriers any money they do not deserve. I would prefer that you would actually prove concept, go 12 months. You will have an audit after 12 months. They will actually assess you for additional premium. You will have made the money you need, and then you can pay the premiums versus having a stress throughout the year when you're trying to prove the value that you came up with. Highly recommend this. And then from there, you reassess this on an annual basis year after year. A great tool to control your costs and furthermore, keep money in your pocket. Next, we're going to talk about workman's comp. It is required by the state of California and you cannot get around it. We will help you decide on what you need. Please do not depend on what the regulators tell you, because they could leave you in a situation that could unfortunately hurt you. Buy what you need to be legal and protect your business, and also build into the cost of what you need to do this so that it is actually a proactive approach, not a stressful reactionary approach. Now let's talk a little bit about workman's comp. The purpose of workman's comp is to actually provide medical benefits and replacement of wages for an employee that is injured in the course of duty while they're at work. If an employee misses more than 3 days of work, they are provided 66% of their wages for every day beyond they're out of work. They are encouraged to get back to work so that they are not only getting the 66% wages, but more importantly, we do not want an employee staying at home and sitting when they could be working for you. The intent for workman's comp is to make the employee whole, take care of them medically, and get them back to work as soon as possible. The policy will pay for the injuries of an employee. If something is very serious, there are multiple scales that come about, whether it be temporary disability, temporary partial disability, temporary permanent disability, or permanent disability. If any of these come about, there is rehab that is provided on behalf, and workman's comp, if an individual is so injured that they are no longer ever able to do their job duties or come back to that job again, the workman's comp carrier will actually provide training to retrain an individual in a new classification and new job skill so that they can get back into the workforce. A very serious big deal about work comp is a lot of people in the cannabis industry say, well, I don't have employees. Well, if you have someone that works for you and you're controlling what they do, you do have employees. There are no there are no 1099 employees allowed in the cannabis industry. No independent contractors. Everyone is a W-2 employee. And if you have W-2 employees, you have to have workman's comp. If you do not have workman's comp, the state of California can come after you for up to $500 per employee per day. This can be an extinguishing event if you do not take it seriously. We're going to kind of discuss how the pricing comes about for workman's comp and understand how it breaks down based on job descriptions. What is workman's comp and its class codes? Workman's comp basically is described by class codes, and then they're basically multiplied times a rate. The great way to describe this is it's based on the exposure. So an extraction worker dealing with flammables and explosives is looked upon differently than a bun tender at a retail facility. In simplest terms, a premium is calculated using the following formulas for each class code, and we'll see how the math works. You have your estimated payroll divided by 100 times the rate, which is your class code, and there's a cost at that, and then ultimately it creates your premium. Here's a great example to see. Below, we have an estimated payroll of $300,000. Above, you have the $300,000 divided by 100 times the rate. Today, we're looking at a retail class code. The class code is 8017. The rate of that class code is roughly $5. So in our equation, we would take 300,000 divided by 100 times $5, and the premium for 300,000 payroll will be $15,000. The importance of this is really to talk about our next thing. What is an XMOD and how is it applied to your workman's comp? The importance of your workman's comp mod directly affects how much credits or debits are created on behalf of your program. An XMOD stands for an experience modification. And ultimately what you are put up against is the benchmark of everyone else. Everyone is rated as average at 1.00 or 100%. From there, we're going to talk about the better you do, this rating actually will go down. When I say the worse you do, which means you're having claims, expensive claims, frequency of claims, claims are not getting closed, and you're having consistency of claims. Your mod will go in the other direction and create a debit and actually charge you more premium. It's used to compare your loss ratio against the history of the averages of the rest of the industry. And from there, you'll see the positive and negative of what you do. This is all controlled by safety, accountability, and culture of what you do within your organization. An effective safety program and implementation of claims management will help reduce workman's comp claims, injuries, and create discounts for your workman's compensation insurance, and hopefully helps you control your culture and your loss record. So here's a great example. If someone were to pay $100,000 a year, and if their mod was at 75% or 0.75, they now would be paying $75,000. But on the opposite end is their mod is 125% or 1.25, they get a debit of $25,000. They're now paying $125,000. So look at the difference in the same risk. Someone who's doing a very good job versus someone who's doing a very poor job, it's a $50,000 delta to their bottom line and profitability. Workman's comp is one of the largest costs of your business. It is also one of the biggest controls of your business. The better you do, the more you're rewarded. If you do not take this seriously, I've watched doors get closed because their mod has gotten to the multiple hundreds, and you will never be able to escape from it. XMOD increases or decreases like we've talked about. Like we said as well, the average is 100. If your cost is above that, you're paying more. If your cost is less, you're going to be paying less than 100%. Accidents will always happen. So we want you to plan for claims and be extremely proactive. Loss control and safety is very important for your culture and essential to your loss control and your cost to your overall insurance program. Now let's go a little bit into some additional steps and things that you need to be aware of concerning risk management that work along with your insurance. Human resources, safety, and OSHA training. Human resources and safety really have to coincide for your business. I always tell people safety, accountability, and culture is actually how you're going to save money. And when it comes to that, it's really about what you do from onboarding an employee to training an employee, reinforcing that, and recycling it over and over and over again. If your employees are safe and feel welcome and appreciative, this is handled by them and not reinforced by management. Two things that you need to be aware of. Your employee handbook is the Bible of your HR or human resources. It has your job descriptions, it has your termination, it has your write-ups, it has your laws and your drug and alcohol policy. It has everything you need that actually is about onboarding your employee and the do's and don'ts. Your IIPP is your injury illness prevention program. This is required by the state of California if you have over 10 employees, and it is the safety Bible behind your organization of the do's and don'ts, what not to do in safety. Like we just talked about, your employee handbook is the guide and explains all your human resources as well as the rights and obligations related to the employment. And your injury illness prevention program is how the safety is implemented and handled in the organization. The key to both these elements is documentation as well, and we'll discuss that further. Make sure that you are working with someone to get these things implemented. I do not want you to actually go online and try to pull off a template. Hire someone to do it correctly. Your employee handbook and your IPP combined to do out the door, probably less than $5,000 for both of them. Hire professionals to do them correctly so that you do not have a situation where you're sued because you did something wrong for discrimination, harassment, or anything concerning employees, or having OSHA come see you because you have a safety violation that was not handled correctly because you did things wrong. Next, let's talk about Cal OSHA training. It is a requirement by the state of California. Whether you're aware of this or not, once you actually get your provisional license, you have 1 year to get your Cal OSHA 30 training done. The law states you have to have one manager or supervisor and one employee done when your license is done. It's supposed to be done per license. Cal OSHA is not being real strict on this, so my recommendation is make sure you get at least one manager and one employee done. Our true recommendation is have 2 managers get this done. You do not want to have an employee do the Cal OSHA 30 training, get a skill set, and leave you for another company because you gave them something they did not have before they worked for you. Have your managers trained. They will implement culture and training down to your employees, and it gets reinforced over and over. This is a really key important part. If you go to do this OSHA 30 training online, you are actually not complying and you're going to have to do this twice. Fed OSHA controls online training. Cal OSHA is the highest strict guidelines for the entire United States. It is above and beyond what the federal government requires. And the California Cannabis Control is actually requiring you to do Cal OSHA. So make sure you do a Cal OSHA training, not a federal online training, because if you do, Cal OSHA is going to tell you, we appreciate what you did, but you still got to do the training again. Unfortunately, there is no online training for Cal OSHA. You have to do a classroom training, and due to COVID, you used to be able to have 40 people in a classroom. Right now, we're seeing classrooms sitting somewhere between 15 and 20 students due to spacing. Once you do the 30 hours of training, basically you are required to take the test and pass the test. The good thing about passing the test is once you do this, you now will get recognized by the state of California. You will get a card saying that you've done your OSHA 30 training. And this the card is actually good for 4 years. So the great thing is this is not an annual test. And it also will help you reinforce the culture you're providing your organization. And then furthermore, the things you're doing that are reinforced by your IIPP. Once again, remember your employee handbook and your IIPP are very important to your culture, accountability, and safety of your organization, and they are the backbone of supporting your risk management platform. Lastly, the OSHA 30 training is 30 hours. We recommend it for your lead people, and make sure your safety team takes it very seriously so they can reinforce what is needed to keep your business safe. Regular safety meetings are definitely encouraged, and we recommend that you do meetings for every division at minimum on a monthly basis. The purpose of this is safety never gets old. It has to always be reinforced. And the more it's reinforced, it becomes common and it becomes second nature. And ultimately, we want to take any type of shock or doubt out of situations. If something were to happen, we know what to do. And then furthermore, we can take action because we've been trained. Last thing we've talked about, document, document, document. If you don't document it, it never happened. This is very important for your IIPP and also very important for your employee handbook. When you do trainings of any nature, document the training, date it, have everyone sign off, and keep a record of it. The purpose of this is if you get into a lawsuit, whether it be discrimination, harassment, wrongful termination on an HR aspect, your documentation and write-ups will protect you. Same thing for OSHA. Any documentation you've done or trainings, forklift training, fit test training for your mask, goggle training, lifting training, OSHA 30 training, all these things are your defense on behalf of a claim. If you are found negligent, OSHA can give you hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines and you will not be able to negotiate out. Things can still go wrong, everyone. So please make sure you document it, because if you can't mitigate your fines. Thank you, everyone.
Well, Jesse, there's a lot of info, lot to unpack there. Thank you very much. You know, as you said, it can seem like a fire hose, and there's a lot to take in there, but so much of it is so important and so critical to all the entrepreneurs that are in business or expanding their business or pursuing business opportunities in the city of Los Angeles. So I appreciate all the information. Got a lot of great questions, a lot of interaction, a lot of comments, and let's just kind of open this up and try to do some clarification.
Sure.
So one question that came in, I know that in the industry, you know, we all have our personal insurance or auto and home and or business insurance in different businesses. So there's a lot of, I would say, you know, perceived insurance options out there. You know, obviously, you know, I think I know your answer, but I wanted to get some clarification behind your answer. Do you recommend cannabis insurance companies versus regular insurance companies, and why? You know, because there's a lot of insurance companies that may say they can cover you and insure you, but, you know, just expand on that as people, you know, have to make those decisions out there.
Well, I think it starts off if anyone is actually where the caveat happens is when we're doing the non-owned auto. Kind of that's where you have employees driving their car. And I have a lot of business owners that say, my employee has insurance, I don't need it. The problem, like I said earlier, is their personal insurance, every one of us, me, you, everyone on this call, their personal insurance has an exclusion that says there is no coverage for business exposures or delivery. And that's a very broad definition that's been out there for about 10 years. And it's been challenged now many times. The purpose of the non-owned auto policies, it puts liability excess over the personal auto, which means if the personal auto of the employee denies coverage, that coverage will drop down to zero and pick up $1, and all liability will be covered by the business owner. The problem with this is that the employee is stuck with a gap. They are going to have liability for whatever they did wrong. But if there's physical damage to their personal car, there's absolutely zero coverage. Their personal auto denied coverage. There is no coverage responsibility for the owner. The only way this is fixed is if a business owner has their employees get what's called a business use endorsement. What this does is it now basically becomes an expansion of their personal auto policy. It extends physical damage on the vehicle while driving on behalf, and it will respond in liability if needed. The intent for this is not to have the employee picking up the liability of what's going on, but to pick up the physical damage. Because ultimately the liability, and I've experienced many claims, and the best example I have is I had a 23-year-old driver that said she did not drive for work, signed her own insurance that she basically doesn't drive, got into an accident, hit a semi, did $45,000 of damage to the semi, totaled her car. We fixed the semi. She had gap in coverage, but because she had gap coverage and her coverage excluded, she had a $13,000 delta. And there was no liability from anyone. We had contracts. My client had contracts saying that everything was signed, and we got stuck in a really bad situation. Where this all came about was from Uber and Lyft. Uber and Lyft actually implemented this business use endorsement years ago when they started doing livery, because they needed to actually fix what they were using, and the personal auto claims were happening and they couldn't fix it. So this kind of has become an evolution of auto transportation, whether it be food or livery. And this, once again, the mileage reimbursement that the owners are doing pays for this. So when an employee goes, oh, I'm not paying for it. Well, you're being compensated to pay for oil changes, tire rotations, and cost of insurance. So with that, it's one of those things where if you have an employee that's fighting this, you need to have a onboarding agreement that clearly states this and protects you in case something happens. You need to have hold harmless verbiage. You need to have zero cell phone verbiage. You need to have this endorsement we're discussing in the contract. I mean, these are all the best practices you need to put in play. And ultimately, this is the learning that's come about that we've experienced over the years of protecting auto.
Yeah, well, clearly I could see where, cannabis specific firms that have dealt with, claims denied or claims approved, and having the experience and guiding entrepreneurs is very critical and very important and very useful. Let me share some of these questions. Mitchell had a really interesting question, and I know this is related to the kind of like the alcohol industry. Does the liability work like dram shop law, similar to bartending school? A bartender selling alcohol, where even the bud tender is liable, or does it stop with the business? This is a really interesting question.
I know exactly what we're talking about. So
Yeah.
dram shop, that is normally covered under liquor liability. That's where hotels can have you consuming alcohol in your room, have casinos, bars, everything. The challenge we have is there is not a cannabis liability policy in existence. Where there was coverage, and it's now not, it actually has been pulled off because we can't even write it now, was for our on-site consumption lounges. We would be able to write liability for the on-site consumption. And at that point, based on the controls of that specific location, liability was extended based on consumption going on. Now, the liability from the dispensary is a difference because there shouldn't be consumption on there. So there should be no liability to the bud tender, no liability to the business because no consumption. This whole thing comes about for on-site consumption lounges. And as of 30 days ago, the data that we have is on-site consumption lounges can't even provide the coverage they need to be provided to protect themselves correctly because the insurance industry pulled all coverage back and they're not even offering it. I'm working on a hotel right now that's trying to create on-site consumption, and it's almost impossible.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? So regulations don't allow a lot of things in the industry yet, and insurance coverage is evolving as well, right?
Well, not just, I mean, it's evolving, but the challenge is insurance is really slow no matter what. And one of the biggest things that we fight for is creating solutions for the industry that have been lacking. Mm-hmm. And from there, this is one of the biggest things we've been pounding on for almost 6 years and continue on until it's solved, because the question is legit. It is exactly the way it's perceived. But the problem is that because on consumption lounges are the only thing that you would compare to a bar, which is where the dram shop law would fall into play. It does not account for any of the other industries because consumption is not applying and they would not be liable.
Great. Thank you. Elizabeth's had a great question as well. It's related to kind of inside the shop here, which is pretty interesting as well. But if you have an employee who engages in theft of product or money, is there coverage for that? And under what type of policy would that be covered?
Yes, there is. It's called crime. And that's exactly what it's covered for. So you have two ways. You can get a sublimit from most of the carriers under your property, and the most you can get under sublimit is usually $100,000. And that is exactly what's for employee theft, monies, and securities. We recommend writing a standalone crime policy. Crime policies, you can get up to $2 million of coverage. The crime policy also covers employee theft. It covers cash and or product in transit. So remember we were talking earlier about the stock throughput. The crime policy is this catch-all, which covers product, cash, employee theft, and it's very real. We provide this to many of our more vertically integrated companies or more sophisticated companies, but we encourage it for everyone because anyone who has product, they got exposure, and it's inside theft is the number one thing of any business.
Would that also cover some of the external, break-ins, crime, looting? Is it covered under that same?
Different. So give an example. If you have property on your liability or your property policy, and you have your product in a vault or a safe room, and you have a robbery, the property policy would kick in. If you had a crime policy, the crime policy would also kick in. I'm actually dealing with the claim as we speak that I have both these coverages and we are deflecting to the crime first, and then we'll use the property policy second.
So they
It's a large claim. I'll just put it that way. And in the process of, I'm thankful we're insured correctly. And what we are doing is making sure that we get policy limits, or we get the payout that we do deserve for our client. And ultimately, it wasn't, the intent was not to overlap coverages. It was, the crime was really brought for money and product in transit, but it also covered us when we had a robbery on site.
Right. Wow. Interesting. Yeah. And then you mentioned earlier, and Elizabeth had some questions, around some of the. Well, let me ask this one from Keith first, because then this one will kind of parlay. But Keith had some interesting questions. You referenced this in your presentation. How important is it to keep an employee handbook up to date, and have employees sign that handbook? He asked the follow-on question: Can the doors be closed because people don't sign the handbook? Maybe you can just kind of reference that. But how critical is that employee handbook? As it relates to your business, the risks and liabilities that you're faced with.
I'll start off by saying California is number 1A to 1B, New York, the most litigious state. And I will say Los Angeles is the most litigious city in the United States. So from there, your employee handbook is your Bible and essential. It is everything you need. It describes everything you need for onboarding, and also creates your job descriptions. What is acceptable, what is not. It also has what is determinable actions, what we're going to do for write-ups. The importance of this, yes, the employee is required to sign off on it because it protects you. And then furthermore, it becomes your disciplinary action and your support system on anything you need to do if you have to take action. And then from there, something really goes bad, you terminate an employee, you do everything right, they have an attorney, they sue you for wrongful discrimination and termination and everything they can because an attorney said so. Your defense is what you just did, just having the employee sign off the write-ups you've done. Without that, you're writing a check. And the average claim in California for EPLI is over $80,000 for nothing other than you have to write a check.
Yeah, so obviously, very critical, and
Huge.
not
And
only
what I will also tell people is reach out to a professional. Don't try to do this yourself. If you're going to hire in-house HR, I support it. Make sure that someone has HR experience, because human resources is not what everyone else does. I deal with human resources every day, and it's not what I do. And I actually have a department, and I'm thankful for it, because employee challenges are employee challenges, and you do not want to be caught in a situation that you're not prepared for. If you do not know, then what I would recommend is reach out to third-party providers. We know lots of great people that we can recommend that are vested, trusted, and actually understand cannabis. And these are resources that you can literally hire in-house or have as a third-party administrator to help support you out of office.
Yeah, and that's key. Having an employee handbook, but making sure that your HR team or department or partners are doing the training and making sure everyone understands what the handbook says, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. And I wanted, you mentioned EPLI, and a lot of people probably don't know what that is, employee practice liability insurance.
Let's dive in.
Can you just share, like, why and when should I consider adding that coverage? Because, that's kind of, I don't know if it's unique coverage, but it's specific coverage, right?
This is going to be the new biggest hurt to the cannabis industry. It's already been hammering any other industry for 15, 20 years in California.
Yeah.
Coverages are actually being reduced because we are so litigious in California that contracts are getting coverages removed. One of the biggest exposures for our industry is what's called wage and hour, which is your breaks and your time clocks. If you do not have this perfect, and you have an employee 4 years later after working for you says, I never got my breaks, and you don't have 100% of your data proving that they had their breaks, you will be paying them back for 4 years and a penalty. So this is kind of essential on what you need. The reason I say EPLI is a really big deal is it's not if, it's when. Everyone is going to get a disgruntled employee at some point in time. The one thing I will say is price it out. Pricing of EPLI has kind of gotten a little sideways, which the challenge you also have is deductibles have gotten actually pretty large. So if you've got a small situation, it's one of those things where you might have general counsel or someone that can actually handle it, and they'll be able to control it for less than $25,000 a cost. If you don't, the cost is going to rise because you've got to create defense. The thing where I say this is that you can buy policies that will provide coverage for ADA, and ADA is, they call it the drive-by. There are people that literally can drive by your business, say that you don't have one of 11 things in California with no proof, send you a lawsuit, and you are required to defend and prove that none of those 11 things apply. If you do, any of the one or a $10,000 fine by the state of California. There are people that do this. They're called drive-bys. It's been happening in the restaurant and hospitality industry for 20 years. It's coming to cannabis. So an EPLI policy provides protection on these behalf. The other thing we say is it's a policy for he said, she said claims, which I'm going to be a little loose-lipped, but it's kind of grab-ass claims. You have a manager and you have an employee flirting, dating, doing whatever. Then the employee says the manager did this, vice versa. Even though you're not involved in this at all, you, the business owner, are on the hook. And you now have to defend it, fix it, and pay for it. And your insurance policy will actually pay for this. So liability, the EPLI, in my opinion, is a really important thing. You just need to evaluate if it makes sense for you. Because for us, the way we talk about it, it's a worst case scenario. It's called for a class action suit. And a class action suit is if you have two employees saying the exact same thing, and then at that point, they can bring in as many employees as they want. And the claim can literally go from hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars. That is where this policy is huge, because you would not be able to defend that personally with an attorney without actually leveling up and writing some big checks.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm very familiar with those drive-by claims in the restaurant industry. They've had lots of those in Northern California that
I've been dealing with them 10 years with my restaurant guys.
I know. It's just so just have to be ready. They're coming if they aren't already here, right?
Yep.
In all industries, right?
Yeah, make sure you got your ramps, make sure you got your rails.
Yep.
The good thing about cannabis, we're so heavily regulated that a lot of the things that other industries don't have holding them accountable, cannabis is required. So that's the positive, but just don't assume, make sure.
Yep. And again, EPLI is employee practice liability insurance. So something to research and learn more about, right?
Yep.
Great. Elizabeth had a great question here. So it's I think it's workers' comp, but worker comp related. But would workers' comp insurance cover an employee for mental health counseling if there's an incident at the workplace? For example, if there was a robbery at the workplace and the employee experiences mental health distress or PTSD type symptoms, would something like that be covered?
Yes, 100%. So to even expand beyond that, we've been dealing with COVID related claims with people having mental anguish from COVID, and they've been covered. So mental health is covered under, and so PTSD is a great example. Whether someone had a robbery, they've got mental anguish and stress due to a very stressful situation that happened at work. That is exactly what workman's comp will take care of. Any type of medical situation, including mental health, will be covered by an employer.
Yeah, that's interesting. She did ask a follow-on question around COVID. I don't know if it was if her question was is more related to COVID-19 exposure to an employee at a workplace.
Well, if you need to have your COVID-19 protocols in place.
Yes.
If you do have someone that either believes that they have gotten in contact or are positive, you need to take control, separate them immediately, make sure they get a test, and then from there take action. Because the ultimate factor is you don't want one employee creating a contamination for half your staff or all your staff, because it'll happen that fast. So you just constantly reinforce and communicate with your employees. Make sure you've got all your COVID-19 return to work stuff everywhere, and it's very visual. And then always be reinforcing with your management and your team that this is what we want to do. It's not a negative, it's positive. We're here to take care of you. We want to protect you, but we need to have open dialogue and communication. Please don't hide anything from us.
Yeah, it's a great recommendation. I know, that your COVID protocols, return to work. A lot of people, even though this is an essential industry, there could be some hybrid workers, working at home, working in the operation, et cetera. And those COVID protocols are going to be critical and important as it relates to claims filed against you as an employer, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, we have a lot of employees working remote these days. So that furthermore, that kind of even goes more to the mental state. Make sure you're
Mhm.
checking in on your mental state of your employees working remote, because a lot of our employees working by themselves is not helping them and is increasing depression and anxiety issues because they're by themselves versus the healthy work environment they were at previously. So just always, if you got employees working at home, just remember, check in on them regularly and just make sure they're doing good.
Yep, great. Victoria, had asked the question, and this is, certainly address this as it relates to your options, but, you know, with all the entrepreneurs starting up in the city of LA and all types of different, verticals of the marketplace, how do you budget? How do you budget for insurance and full coverage, and how much? I mean, I don't know how you can, maybe some rules of thumb or some
Yep.
recommendations there.
Now, my recommendation, you start off by working with someone who actually specializes in cannabis. Do not work with your local broker. Do not call your cousin. The reality is cannabis is very specific. It's about the exclusions in the contracts. A lot of people have a misguided idea of the insurance industry for cannabis because they've been misled. And unfortunately, there's a lot of carriers that provide no coverage, but they're charging premium for it. And the big deal is having someone that actually specializes and has been in the space, I would say minimum 3 years. You don't want to be their first client. How many clients do they have? How many claims they've been in? So with working with a broker, evaluate them individually as a business owner, because they're going to be a strategic partner with you. And then from there, it's really about being transparent. I always tell people, I'm your lawyer, your CPA, and your banker. If I don't have the same transparency they have, I can't help you. And from that aspect, it really is, where are we going? And let's discuss the next 12, 24, and 36 months. The beginning of what you need is to get your doors open. And from there, you need nothing. You need a surety bond and you need your general liability. That's the basics. That's what your landlord's going to need. That's what the city of LA is going to need. And then that's what the state's going to need. The only reason you need more policies is if you have employees or if you have auto. Now, from there, it's the budgeting and forecasting. And I always tell people, don't do this last minute, do this way ahead of time. Know what your numbers are, and then be able to slowly build. A lot of times when we put together strategy plans for our clients is we will literally say, this is what you got to start today. And then we're gonna have you add this in 3 months. And then we're gonna have you add this in 3 more months. And then after 12 months, you got everything in play. You also have money, so you can afford to pay for things. You're not creating a financial stress on yourself. And you want to keep premiums as honestly as low as possible for year one to create success. Ultimately, keep as much money in your pocket as you can. And then what's going to happen is you're going to have everything audited within 12 months. You'll be able to validate what your numbers really are. And then from there, you'll be able to track year after year annually what your expenses are, and they can be managed, and you can really project and forecast into the future.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great point. And I know there's a fine line between what's required by regulations and what's recommended to keep you, well covered so that you don't have a catastrophic situation, right? I mean, that's a tough balancing act, right? For entrepreneurs.
And you have a lot of people, and I say this respectfully, is they're coming from the gray market, moving into the legal market. And these are costs they've never experienced. So it's really about helping them understand, hey, baseline, get your general liability. I mean, your general liability can be done for $500. Now there's tax and fees, but it's $500. Then your workman's comp, minimum premium on those policies, they're $2,500. Auto policy, depending on what you are, non-owned auto or owned auto, it's roughly about $5,000. So you can kind of forecast a little bit based on what you're doing. And then we kind of build and scale based on what you need, but it's really thinking about what you want to do when you want to do it. And most importantly, protecting the bottom line by not buying insurance that, one, you can't afford, two, you don't need. And in the process of, what we like to do is help people build and get there. And when they can't afford it after year one and they're in year two, they can afford almost everything they want. And then it becomes a line item like everything else they do. And by year three, they're in a good place. I always tell people, our success is your success. So let's help you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Jesse. Great feedback. And maybe this is, maybe you can just summarize this one question. I mean, are there any basic best practices that operators can implement to save on business insurance?
when you put in good controls, so
Mhm.
you're required to put in your security alarms, you're required to have your cameras, your security plan makes a big difference on your commercial property, especially if you're protecting inventory, product, finished stock. Your auto, what are you doing to be a better commercial driver? Are you having onboarding agreements? Do you have actually guidelines for hiring a driver? Do you have disciplinary or a documentation for things that happen, good or bad? Do you have a type of reward system for your good drivers? What do you do in case of a claim? All these controls you put in place are part of the underwriting process that goes to the carrier as well for pricing. Best practices, safety, accountability, and culture. That's what I tell people. That's how you save money. If you want to save money, let's figure out what you want to do and how to achieve it. And when you really want to be a safe business and you document it, that's what helps your risk manager provide the case to your insurance broker or your insurance carrier to get you pricing.
The accountability and culture. I like it. Should we could create some posters there, Jesse, if they aren't already out there, right? Well, we're coming to the end, but maybe a couple wrap up questions here or comments. So, we've been, and I know throughout the state, you've been supporting entrepreneurs, social equity entrepreneurs throughout the state of California. Here in the city of LA, there lots of challenges and struggles, and now we got to deal with all the insurance, analysis and implementation. But what are three insurance takeaways that you have for the social equity entrepreneurs in the city of LA?
First off, I'll kind of reinforce, make sure that you work with a risk manager or broker that actually specializes and understands the space. You don't want to work with just every broker, because the insurance industry for cannabis is about exclusions in your policy. If you do not clearly understand what you're buying and why, you could be in a situation where you could have a devastating or extinguishing event based on the insurance that you thought you bought to protect your business, but you were wrong. So that's the first thing, is make sure you work with a broker that actually understands the coverages. Second thing is work with professionals. I understand a lot of people are trying to bootstrap stuff. People are trying to do things themselves, but reach out to people like myself and Frank for additional resources, because there are people that, I'll give a good example, CPA. It's one of the biggest people you need to be aware of, that you, for 280E, it's a tax law that you need to be aware of. Make sure you work with a CPA that understands 280E, because if you don't, it won't hurt you now, but it'll hurt you in 3 to 5 years when the IRS does a look back on you. The thing when it comes to another best practice is, please don't be overwhelmed, because I know this is a lot of information that we gave tonight, but put together a basics, a checklist, and then start asking questions. Go to people that can help you provide what you need. And then furthermore, from that aspect, have a situation where you can cross-reference and really create a dialogue, because ultimately you don't want to be doing this last minute. You want to be doing it way ahead of time. You want to be able to make good business decisions, work with good strategic partners. A good risk manager is only part of what you've got to do. You've got 10-person team you got to put together, and whether they're in-house or they're outsourced as a third party, it's really evaluating authorities in the space and what they do. And for us on the insurance aspect, we're just one part of everything you're dealing with. And on the insurance, it is overwhelming, but it won't be if you work with someone who understands what's going on, because they work for you, not the insurance companies. And ultimately, that's where the trust and relationship goes.
Jesse, thank you. Great advice, great parting words. And I think you said it well, that these are big decisions that you have to make, and you really do have to find. There are certainly a lot of options, but you got to find the right person and the right company that you can partner with, that you feel comfortable with, and like you said, you want to feel like you can partner and share the information about your business and your strategy and your vision, and make sure you've got someone you trust that's going to give you the feedback that's straight up, and the advice that you need to set up a good compliant business that can sustain itself and not be, put at risk, or like you say, create an event that, can create catastrophic extinction event.
Yeah, well,
That could happen.
one of the biggest things I will reinforce when it comes to auto, anyone in the auto space, whether it be delivery or distribution, take your liability extremely seriously, because I've experienced a $15 million auto claim and it happened without anyone doing anything wrong. And the reality is there's not enough insurance for you to buy. So that's one area that I always tell people, you need to allot money and make sure that you buy more than $1 million of liability when it comes to auto, because the average death in California, actually nationally, the average death is paying 1.6 million. So $1 million is not even enough money if you kill somebody. And then that's not the worst thing, because a disability, or let's say you hit a multiple car, or you got a family or children, you're at $10 million before you blink an eye because of medical for long-term.
Well, for another workshop, I'd love to learn more about the claims that have been tested and challenged in the state of California and how they were awarded or denied. So that's for another time, right? Well, Jesse, thank you very much. We appreciate your expertise, your participation, and your support. You're a valuable resource and a wealth of knowledge, and we want to thank you again.
I just want to say thank you, Frank, and thank you to everyone. Appreciate being able to support.
Absolutely. Well, great. Let me wrap up with some closing remarks. So thank you all for attending this informative webinar offered by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulations Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance Program. Before signing off tonight, don't forget to fill out your survey with your feedback on tonight's webinar. The link for this survey is dropped in the chat box. You'll also receive an email with a link to the survey to follow tonight's event. Your feedback is critical and important. We want to learn from your feedback and continue to build more and better and impactful and informative workshops for all of you in the city of LA. As of tomorrow, we've officially stepped into October, and while our September webinar series has concluded, we're thrilled to announce that the DCR will be providing you with more opportunities to help you run your cannabis business operations in the city. We'll be hosting webinars all throughout the month of October, so be sure to sign up using our new registration link that should also be dropped in the chat box. I believe it's there now. Our October webinar series will kick off next Tuesday, October 5th at 6 p.m. with the first installment of our series on delivery and transportation with Lauren Banuelos, the Director of Stores for the Los Angeles-based Sweet Flower Dispensary Group. And then next Thursday, October 7th, we're switching things up and offering a webinar during your lunch hour at 11:30 a.m. on the topic of financial planning and management with the CEO of Focus and Flow, Lisa Nelson. I want to thank you all again for your participation tonight. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we will see you soon. Good night. Thank you, everybody.